Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story, this is the place for you.
Every episode, we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into power suits and business cards and unsettling violence. We're going to be talking about Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. And the really cool thing is we've got excerpts from the book, so we're going straight to the source to unpack why this novel still has people talking, decades later.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know what's fascinating about American Psycho is that it's not just a shocking horror story, Ellis uses this over-the-top narrative to hold up a mirror to the excesses of the 1980s, particularly the unchecked greed and materialism that defined the decade.
So you're saying it's more than just a bloodbath, it's a satire.
Exactly, a satire that cuts deep. Ellis uses Patrick Bateman, our protagonist, as this embodiment of Wall Street yuppie culture. He's obsessed with status symbols, designer clothes, expensive restaurants. And let's not forget those meticulously detailed business cards. But beneath this glossy exterior, there's a chilling emptiness.
I've always been struck by that meticulous morning routine Bateman describes. The deep pore cleanser, the herbal mask, the endless array of grooming products. It's like he's trying to construct this perfect facade. But underneath it all, there's this deep-seated anxiety.
That's such a keen observation, and it gets to the heart of Bateman's character. He's desperately trying to fit in with this world that values surface over substance. But even surrounded by all this wealth, he's completely hollow inside.
And it's not just Bateman. It seems like everyone in his circle is equally obsessed with appearances. They're constantly comparing themselves to each other, one-upping each other with their designer labels and their reservations at the hottest restaurants.
Absolutely. Ellis really captures that sense of competition and one-upmanship that permeated Wall Street culture. Remember that scene where Bateman and his colleagues are comparing business cards? They practically have meltdowns over the font, the paper stock, the subtle off-white coloring. It's hilarious and terrifying at the same time.
Okay, so we've got this world of anti-materialism. But then things take a very dark turn. Bateman's not just a shallow yuppie, he's also a brutal killer.
And this is where the novel really starts to push boundaries. The violence is graphic and unsettling, and it's presented in this detached, almost clinical tone that makes it even more disturbing.
There's that scene with the homeless man and the dog. That I can barely even think about. It's so brutal, but it's also strangely compelling. You can't look away.
It's like Ellis is forcing us to confront the dark underbelly of this seemingly glamorous world. The violence becomes a symptom of this moral emptiness, this desensitization to suffering that permeates Bateman's world.
But is Ellis just trying to shock us with all this gore? Or is there a deeper meaning to the violence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that has sparked endless debate about the novel's purpose and message. Some critics argue that the violence is gratuitous, that it serves no real purpose other than to shock and disgust the reader. But I think there's a stronger argument to be made for the satirical nature of the violence.
So you're saying the violence is actually a commentary on something larger?
Exactly. Ellis is using exaggeration and hyperbole to expose the moral bankruptcy of this world he's depicting. The violence becomes a metaphor for the ruthlessness and indifference that drive Wall Street culture. Bateman isn't just a killer, he's the logical endpoint of this unchecked greed and ambition. Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm still trying to process all that violence we talked about.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that it serves a satirical purpose. How does that work exactly?
Think of it this way. Satire often uses exaggeration to highlight societal flaws. By portraying Bateman's horrific acts in such a detached, matter-of-fact manner, Ellis is mirroring the numbness of a culture, obsessed with appearances and indifferent to real human suffering.
So you're saying the violence isn't the point itself, but rather a way to expose something deeper?
Precisely. The blood and gore becomes symbolic of a deeper moral rot. It's like the shiny facade of wealth and success has become so all-consuming that it's blinded society to basic empathy and compassion.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's also this whole element of the unreliable narrator in the book. Are we even supposed to believe everything Bateman tells us?
Yes, the unreliable narrator. This is one of the most intriguing aspects of American Psycho. Ellis deliberately blurs the lines between reality and fantasy, leaving the reader constantly questioning what's real and what's a figment of Bateman's disturbed psyche.
For example, there's that scene where Bateman runs into Paul Owen at the club tunnel. But later we find out Owen is actually in London. So did Bateman actually kill Owen, or is this just another one of his twisted fantasies?
It's never explicitly confirmed. And that's the brilliance of Ellis's approach. He forces us to confront the ambiguity, the uncertainty, and ultimately draw our own conclusions about Bateman's sanity and the nature of his crimes.
It's like we're trapped in Bateman's head, forced to navigate this labyrinth of delusion and violence. And it makes you wonder, if we can't even trust the narrator, how are we supposed to make sense of anything in this story?
That's a great point. And it speaks to a larger theme of the novel, the fragmentation of identity. Bateman is so obsessed with projecting this image of success, of fitting into this world of Wall Street power players, that he's lost touch with any sense of a true self. He becomes a chameleon, adapting to whatever situation he's in, constantly performing for an audience.
Which kind of brings us back to that theme of consumerism you mentioned earlier. Bateman is constantly surrounded by all these designer labels, these status symbols, but it never seems to fill the void within him.
Exactly. Material possessions become a substitute for genuine human connection, for meaning and purpose. Bateman is a perfect example of the emptiness that lies at the heart of consumerist culture. He has everything money can buy, but he's utterly miserable.
And this whole idea of identity being tied to consumerism feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? Think about the way social media encourages us to curate our lives, to present this perfect polished image to the world.
Absolutely. In many ways, American Psycho feels prophetic. Ellis was tapping into anxieties that have only intensified in the digital age. We're constantly bombarded with images of wealth and success, and it's easy to get caught up in this cycle of comparison and competition.
It's like Patrick Bateman with an Instagram account, constantly posting filtered photos of his designer clothes and his luxurious lifestyle. But behind those carefully crafted images, there's still that same emptiness, that same desperation for validation.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? And it speaks to the enduring power of Ellis's satire. He's not just critiquing the excesses of the 1980s. He's exposing something much deeper about human nature. This insatiable desire for more, for better, for the best, that can ultimately lead to a profound sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction.
So we've talked about the violence, the satire, the unreliable narrator, and these themes of identity and consumerism. But what about the broader cultural impact of American Psycho? I mean, this book was hugely controversial when it was first released.
Oh, absolutely. It sparked outrage and debate, with some critics denouncing it as misogynistic and gratuitously violent, while others hailed it as a brilliant satire of the times.
And even today, people are still debating the book's meaning and its message. Why do you think American Psycho continues to resonate with readers decades after it was published?
I think it's because Ellis tapped into something fundamental about our culture. This anxiety about status and identity, this fear of losing ourselves in a world of relentless consumerism. And the novel's disturbing imagery and unsettling ambiguity continue to haunt our collective consciousness.
It's a book that gets under your skin, that stays with you long after you finish reading it. And it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
Speaking of uncomfortable truths, there's this lingering question about the ending. Is Bateman ever caught for his crimes, or does he simply get away with it all?
It's left deliberately ambiguous, isn't it? We're left wondering, is this world so morally bankrupt that someone like Bateman can operate with impunity? Or is it all just a figment of his imagination, a reflection of his own twisted psyche?
And I think that open-endedness is part of what makes the novel so powerful. It forces us to grapple with those questions, to consider the possibility that there are no easy answers, no clear-cut resolutions.
It's a book that challenges our assumptions about good and evil, about justice and accountability, and ultimately leaves us questioning the very nature of reality itself.
And that's precisely what makes American Psycho such a compelling and thought-provoking work of literature. It's a novel that refuses to let us off the hook, that demands our attention, and forces us to confront the darkness lurking beneath the surface of our own society.
So welcome back to our deep dive into American Psycho. We've covered a lot of ground, from the graphic violence to the satire to the unreliable narrator and those chilling themes of consumerism and identity. But I'm still left with this feeling of unease, like something's not quite resolved.
Yeah, that's a common reaction to American Psycho. It's a novel that deliberately provokes discomfort, leaving us with more questions than answers.
And one of the biggest questions, of course, is what does it all mean? What is Ellis ultimately trying to say about the world we live in?
I think it's less about a definitive message and more about a reflection, a dark mirror held up to society. Ellis is asking us to confront the potential consequences of unchecked greed, ambition, and materialism. He's showing us how these desires, when taken to the extreme, can warp our perceptions, erode our empathy, and ultimately lead to violence and destruction.
But is he saying that everyone on Wall Street is a potential Patrick Bateman? That anyone driven by ambition is capable of these horrific acts?
Not necessarily. Remember, American Psycho is a satire. It's an exaggeration, a grotesque caricature of a certain mindset, a certain culture. Bateman is the embodiment of these excesses taken to their logical extreme.
So it's more about warning us of the dangers of these tendencies rather than saying they're inherently evil.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the potential for darkness within ourselves, the seductive pull of materialism, the allure of power and status. Bateman's story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of these things can come at a great cost both to ourselves and to others.
You know, one of the things that struck me about the novel is how easily Bateman blends into his surroundings. He's almost invisible, despite his horrific acts.
That's a really insightful observation. It speaks to the theme of conformity, the way individuals can become lost in a sea of sameness. Bateman and his colleagues are so obsessed with presenting this perfect image of success that they become interchangeable. They lose their individuality, their humanity in the process.
And it makes his crimes even more chilling, doesn't it? He's able to operate in this world, commit these acts, and no one seems to notice or care.
It speaks to a kind of collective blindness, a willful ignorance that allows these things to happen. And this isn't just limited to Wall Street. It's a commentary on society as a whole, the way we can become desensitized to violence, to suffering, when it doesn't directly affect us.
Okay, so we've talked about the meaning, the themes, the cultural impact. But I want to circle back to something you said earlier about the book, leaving us with more questions than answers. What are some of the questions that American Psycho raises for you and for our listener?
For me, one of the biggest questions is about accountability. Does Bateman ever face consequences for his actions? Or does he simply disappear into the anonymity of the crowd? And if so, what does that say about our justice system, our ability to hold people accountable for their crimes?
Yeah, and for our listener, I think the question is even more personal. It's about looking inward, examining our own relationship to consumerism, to ambition, to the pursuit of status. Are we allowing ourselves to be defined by these external markers of success? Are we losing sight of what truly matters in the process?
Those are powerful questions, and they're ones that American Psycho forces us to grapple with, whether we like it or not.
It's definitely not an easy read, but it's a necessary one. American Psycho challenges us to look beyond the surface, to confront the darkness lurking beneath the veneer of success, and to consider the consequences of our own desires and ambitions.
And ultimately, it reminds us that true fulfillment comes not from the accumulation of things, but from cultivating genuine connections, pursuing meaningful goals, and living authentically in a world that often rewards conformity and superficiality.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the unsettling world of American Psycho. It's a novel that will stay with you long after you've finished reading it, forcing you to question your assumptions and confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world around you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of BookerCast. We hope you enjoyed diving into it as much as we did. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this episode with your fellow book lovers. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next deep dive. Bye for now, and happy reading.